it's interesting because if you say this has become hysterical or it's become a witch hunt, people will say, how dare you say that? If you say it again, we'll drag you into the public square and put you in the stocks. And you think, well, there you go, that's your proof.
I think I'm obsessed with sex, he says, adding that he's now slept with about 20 men and women despite being married. Previously, he'd never cheated on his wife or had any homosexual encounters, he says.
He says.
You can walk down a street in London and you encounter people who just come, who don't speak your language, don't wear your clothes, don't subscribe to any of your values. It feels increasingly jarring.
Hello and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every single episode by Chris Snowdon from the IEA. How you doing, Chris?
I'm all right, Tom. Hello, and hello, listeners and viewers.
And also big hello to returning guest, Spike's chief political writer, Brendan O'Neill. How you doing, Brendan?
Hey, Tom. Hi, Chris. How you doing?
We should also say the author of the brilliant new book, Vibe Shift, which is now up for order on Amazon. So if you haven't got your hands on a copy yet, make sure you go to Amazon and get one. We had a very lovely launch event the other night.
We did.
All of the Spike supporters. It was great to see so many of you there. Chris, shall we kick off with vaping?
Yeah.
And the ban on vaping in conceivably every sort of publicly accessible building. I understand you've been combing through the proposal and particularly the impact assessment around this. What did you find out?
The evidence. Oh, it's so depressing, isn't it? It's just like
Start as we mean to go on. This is good.
Hates me personally. Everything it does is just trying to take away everything good in my life. And I didn't actually see this coming. I thought they're not going to be daft enough to do that because there's just no need for it at all. So why are they doing it? That's why I looked at the impact assessment. The impact assessments, if you've never read one, and let's face it, you'd be mad to unless you actually have to kind of do it as part of your job. Impact assessments are there as part of evidence-based policy. So it's to stop, or to try to stop, governments just introducing things on a whim which aren't going to make any difference and don't pass the cost-benefit analysis, right? So it's all about the cost-benefit analysis, and they monetize everything, which is okay in a way. And I've seen some ridiculous ones in my time because they've got to make these ludicrous ideas look as if they are evidence-based, because the government's not going to say it's not going to do it just because the impact assessment says so. But with this one, it's like, well, what are the benefits, right? We can probably work out what the costs are, but what are the benefits of stopping people vaping everywhere you can't smoke, right? And they come up with two possible justifications. The first is the danger of secondhand vapor. They do find some studies. Obviously, there have been people in California and places trying to find evidence for secondhand vaping being dangerous. It is essentially water vapor with a few other ingredients, all of which are basically considered safe. And the studies, mostly written by people who you can tell are desperate to try and find some risk at all, really, really struggle because there isn't any risk. And so they settle for saying things like, oh, there's a bit more propylglycol in the atmosphere than there was before this guy was vaping in this incredibly confined, unventilated space that we put him into. Is that dangerous? Not really. Is it above the safe levels normally recognized? No. Okay, so there's no problem, is it? Unless you take an unbelievably kind of purist view of the air, which is, it's always at its optimum, you know. I mean, very often, actually, when they're looking at particulate matter in one study, they put some bloke in his car with all the windows wound up to try and get a maximum reading. And still, the particulate matter readings were higher outside than they were in the car, right? So they can't find any evidence. And to be fair, the people who write the impact assessment more or less say, yeah, we can't really say this is particularly dangerous, but there you go. The second justification is just explicitly paternalistic. It's just like, we want to reduce the number of vapors. And that, of course, was really deep down, we all know that's why the smoking ban came in. It wasn't to protect bar staff. It was to try and stop people smoking by making their life a bit more difficult, you know. But at least that was the unspoken agenda on that one. With this, 20 years later, this is the explicit agenda. We don't like vaping.
Quiet part out loud.
We're going to make your life miserable, so you stop. The trouble is, they actually, in the impact assessment, say, we don't even know if this will happen. Yeah, because actually the smoking ban, they admit, didn't really reduce the number of smokers. Certainly not in the kind of short term. So they don't put a price on that. They don't put a price on the benefits of less secondhand vapor because there don't seem to be any. They then do put a price on a few tangible things like, oh, everyone's going to put up these bloody signs everywhere saying no smoking and vaping now. And there's going to have to be some enforcement and you have to retrain staff and all that kind of thing. So they price that up as being £500 million, with zero benefits on the other side. So immediately fails the cost benefit analysis. Makes it look to me as if whoever's writing this impact assessment was pretty skeptical about it themselves, or maybe it was just that they genuinely cannot find any reason to do this. It's an absolutely horrendous idea. Gonna pick a fight with 5 million vapors for no real reason. I would like to hear the Tories and Reform and other parties come out against this. And I know a lot of people think that vaping's already been banned in pubs because so many pubs ban it themselves. Well, that's fine. I mean, that kind of shows that the market's worked in that case. You don't have to ban it in the pubs I go to, you know? I don't care if 80% of people think vaping should be banned in pubs. Let's ban it in 80% of pubs, you know? And it's different to have a voluntary ban, which isn't, you know, which the people who own the property can enforce in their own way. You know, I think a lot of pubs actually ban vaping because 10 years ago you had all these cloud chasing and idiots blowing out masses of vapor, right? And nobody likes those people. They are a genuine nuisance. And I think actually a lot of pubs which say no vaping, they turn a blind eye to me or you having a cheeky stealth vape on an unflavored device. But it does give them the authority to clamp down on the idiots. In my snooker club, we have a sign that just says, considerate vaping permitted, no strong flavors, please be mindful of others. That's all you need, because the beauty in that sign, which I made, is the ambiguity. Like, what's a strong flavor? What is considerate vaping? It just means that the bar staff have the authority. If someone comes in and makes use of themselves and go, oh, don't make me tap the sign.
Yeah.
That's all we ever needed, a bit of give and take.
I like the idea of a sign like that, you know, considerate vaping allowed, but don't play up. You know, because the thing is, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on this podcast, but I've made my peace with the smoking ban, I have to say. I've removed this file from my file of hills I'm prepared to die on.
Get out.
The smoking ban is not in there anymore, because I was talking to my nephew the other day. He's 17. He started going to pubs, and I was telling him what pubs were like when I was his age, and he was horrified. He almost couldn't believe me when I said there was a fog of smoke, and you smoked at the table, you smoked at the bar, you smoked in the toilet. I mean, it was gross. It was
great.
It was gross.
It was fantastic.
And I actually think pubs should, as you're saying with vaping, institutions, establishments should still have the choice that you can be a vaping establishment, you should have the choice to be a smoking establishment, and then other pubs can not be. So I still very much agree with that. I don't think we needed a state ban. But, you know, when I think about vaping, as a non-vapor, no offense to my two vaping friends,
Bit naff, isn't it?
it's catastrophically uncool.
I know that.
And I'm not being facetious. It really is the most uncool thing you can do.
Sucking on a highlighter pen.
It is the
Wednesday
saddest
afternoon,
thing
sort of,
imaginable. It is so, it makes me pine for the old days of smoking. You know, you will never see an Audrey Hepburn style actress with a vape in her mouth. You know, that's not going to happen. Everyone would laugh if it did happen. Yeah. But then more to the point, I think we have to be honest, they are annoying. And it's particularly the flavored ones that are annoying. If you're in a pub or even on the street and you get this waft of fake chemical smell of banana or raspberry, and it's a mushroom cloud of thin vapor, it is gross. So the question I keep asking myself, I'm against banning vaping everywhere because I think people should have choice. Institutions and individuals should have choice. But I do think, you're welcome, but I do think a question I keep asking myself is we should be allowed to do certain things, but we should not do them. I think there are many things I would put into that category. One of them is, for example, I was thinking about this earlier today. A woman should be allowed to take out her makeup bag and do her makeup on the tube at 7:30 in the morning, but she shouldn't do it because she is involuntarily inviting the rest of the people in that carriage to watch her do a makeup tutorial. And they probably don't want to see that on a Monday morning. You should be able to have a cigarette outside the school gates while you're waiting for your kid, but you shouldn't, because there are kids around and other parents who probably won't like it. You should be allowed to vape in these 6 million buildings or whatever it is, but in some of them you shouldn't, especially if you smoke a flavored vape. So it's that kind of, it's the give and take, as you're saying. We seem to have this situation in the modern world where there are two choices. Either people think freedom means you can do whatever you want, wherever you want, and anyone who says otherwise is an old fuddy-duddy. Or we think we have to invite the state in to control the minutiae of everyday life. And there's got to be a kind of sociable middle ground where people are free to act in the way in which they want to, but in certain situations they don't. And I wonder if we encourage that culture in relation to vaping, then we won't need government over it.
Well, if you're dealing with private property, and we are, I mean, the vast majority of these 6 million buildings are privately owned, then that already happens. I mean, the vaping is actually quite a good example of this. As I said, basically, you kind of assume most places, even if there's not a sign up, that you can't vape in it. I don't have a massive problem with that. I'd rather there are a few more places you could vape in. But I don't see the justification for saying when it has to be now 100%. Before the smoking ban, it was true there were very few non-smoking pubs. And I remember a few pubs trying to go non-smoking. They were so unpopular, they had to bring back smoking. Whatever you say about the bad old days, actually, non-smokers didn't seem to have a problem with it in practice. And so, although obviously I didn't agree with the smoking ban, you could sort of see them going, oh, there's a market failure here. A lot of people actually would like to go to a non-smoking pub, despite the fact that all these non-smoking pubs closed down within 2 weeks. So let's have maybe what the Labour government originally promised in its manifesto, which was going to ban smoking in some pubs, but not all of them. With vaping, it's almost the other way around. It's like vaping's hardly allowed anywhere, therefore let's ban it everywhere. You can't win. It's always a complete ban is the answer to these bloody people. And you're right, Brendan, there are always clashes of rights in society. A lot of people would say, having to, or even having the option to watch someone put their makeup in the morning is a pretty small infringement on your right. But if you find it annoying, you find it annoying, And clearly, I agree with you about the big clouds of cherry vapes. It's a bit annoying. But people often forget also not being allowed to vape anywhere is bloody annoying. And 5 million vapors should have rights, and 5 million smokers should have rights. It's annoying, very annoying if you're a smoker. You cannot smoke hardly anywhere. You try getting on a flight, and so it's annoying not to be able to smoke at any point during that journey, including outdoors most of the time. But no one cares about smokers being annoyed. No one cares about smokers being irritated by this constant infringement on freedom, because not having freedom apparently doesn't count as something that justifies being annoyed.
Yeah, I don't deny at all that the anti-smoking crusade was driven by an authoritarian impulse. I think we agree on that. And that Orwellian word they use, smoke-free, when they actually put them together, it became a new speak word. We will make the world smoke-free. And they used the word free to justify something that was actually very illiberal, which was telling you what you could do and where you could do it. So I agree with that. But the thing is that I don't think it's a question of rights, because when people say, what about my right to do this, or what about my right? So I don't think I have the right to get on the tube without seeing someone put their makeup on. That's not a right I have. It's not a right I would want. I'm not going to march to Parliament to demand this right. But for me, it's about a culture of liberty. That's what I've always been interested in. How can we have the broadest, most sweeping culture of liberty possible, where people feel free, feel like they are, at the moment you walk through London or another big city and you feel like a non-player character in someone else's video game, because people are, and it's not about rights, it's about the collapse of that distinction between public and private. So the only reason I would get wound up by someone putting on makeup or playing their music out loud or doing other things is that they are treating the public sphere as a private zone, as their own bathroom,
their own little bubble.
Yeah, they're in their own
around.
bubble and no one else matters. And I do think there are times when the vaping thing crosses over into that. And you're absolutely right. There are discreet vapors who don't have those stupid flavors, and that's not a problem at all. But it's that culture in which there is this kind of collapse of any distinction between what you might do privately and what you might do publicly, and then what that does to other citizens and their sense of liberty. So I don't have an easy solution to that. Certainly the solution is not for the government to come in and ban things. And nor is it, I think, for everyone to say, well, I have the right to do this, so shut the hell up. There's got to be something else. So I think the vaping thing is a good example of this, because it's not a health question. For all the reasons you lay out, one could have made the case that smoking is bad for you. And there are people who'd made the case that it is the government's responsibility to stop you from making yourself unhealthy. I don't agree with that. People should be free to do what they want to their own bodies. But the vaping is a good example of what I'm talking about, because it's not about health. It's not bad for you, and in fact it's good for you because it gets you off the ciggies, but it does raise questions about how you interact with other people. And do you want to have a mushroom cloud of grey smoke that smells of strawberry when you're walking down the street? So it raises those questions, and those ones are really difficult to answer, I think.
And I say this whilst this is watermelon ice flavour, if you haven't noticed. But also implicit within that culture of freedom is also, because that can be caricatured as letting anyone do whatever they want whenever they like it, but implicit within that is people coming to these determinations themselves and arguing things out and pushing back. And I think the big part of the problem, because we are so atomized these days, is that people feel increasingly incapable of asserting either pre-existing norms or clamping down on new errant forms of behaviour, whether it's playing music out loud or what have you. And so therefore, you have to invite the authorities to do something
Yeah,
about
because
it.
you expect, that's what happens. If you expect the authorities to do things for you, then you will just have fewer and fewer freedoms, because every weirdo minority who doesn't like something passionately, but bear in mind, most people don't care about this kind of stuff at all, will be lobbying their politician. I really think that is why you should still oppose the smoking ban, because that was the big precedent that was started in this area. I know things have been banned in the past, obviously, but that was a big one, in that everyone deep down knew that this was about paternalism and pushing smokers around. And it was controversial when it came in, and the government was a bit nervous about doing it. And ever since then, because it's now broadly popular, these bloody public health groups have been saying, oh, we should do brave and bold action on breakfast cereals or vaping or alcohol.
Yeah, the dam
gambling,
burst
and
at
all
that
this.
point,
Be that guy to take on these big industries, because they always make it industry versus
It went from big
public
tobacco
health.
to big sugar, didn't we?
Big sugar, big gambling, big everything, big vape now.
Yeah, and I was a
This is
smoker
infuriating.
back then, and
Right.
I loved smoking. I still, when I talk about not liking the smell of vaping in the street, but I like the smell of cigarettes. I know that's a preference thing. It still gets my juices flowing when I have a waft of cigarette smoke. And that's a preference thing, I understand. But I was a smoker back when the smoking ban came in. I was against the smoking ban. We wrote loads of stuff on Spiders before your time. You're too young to remember it. We wrote loads of stuff on Spiked about the smoking ban. We were against it. I probably would be against it now. I've made my peace with it because it's so long ago, and because I no longer smoke, and I like being in a pub in which you can breathe and it's nice. But
Well,
I
here we
just
are,
think,
right?
but I
20 years
think
later, talking
no,
about
but I
banning
think
vaping. And that's
the
what happens with the slippery slope.
the solution at that time should have been just creating the situation where you have that choice. You can go to a smoky pub, you can go to a non-smoky pub. That was obviously the answer. And if we'd gone further down that road, I completely agree with you, Chris. They wouldn't have felt emboldened to intervene and encroach on every other area of life. And people would have still felt pretty free to go about their business as they wanted. And we could have seen which pubs survived and which didn't.
You could always tell with the smoking ban. The tell was how broad sweeping it was. The fact, why did it have to apply to open air train platforms? Why did it have to apply? Why were even having a cigar bar is suddenly verboten? Like, it was just clear that, as you say, Chris, it was
They were
just about
terrified of any
pushing people
exemptions,
around.
because the places that got the exemptions would have done really well. That's why the manifesto commitment fell apart, because it was going to exempt wet pubs and private members clubs. And the anti-smoking lobby went and spoke to the big pubcos and said, you realise, you guys serve food in your pubs. All your customers are going to leave and go to the local independent and the flat roof pub and the private members snooker club. And they were right. So they got the rest of them they got the big pubcos to demand a level playing field. It was classic bootleggers and Baptist stuff.
Should we move on, Chris, and talk about a quite colourful story that you picked out and you've written about, which is this new kind of low-level epidemic of people who are engaging in some quite risky, quite self-destructive behaviours, everything from buying clothes they don't need to developing gambling addictions to all sorts of more
Fruity
things. That's the word I was searching for. Because they've been prescribed a certain type of medication for a condition I'll admit I wasn't aware of, called restless leg syndrome. Do you want to fill us in on some of the details and some of the quite colourful examples?
Yeah, it's a quirky story, Tom. The drug is called Rapinarole, I think, and it's for something called restless leg syndrome, which just means your leg shakes, as far as I can tell.
I think I've got that.
But also, oh really? Oh, well,
Yeah.
you should definitely try this drug, Brendan, because it sounds
You're
great.
going to have a hell of a weekend.
And also for Parkinson's, which also, of course, involves a certain amount of shaking. And this drug basically calms down the shaking, presumably. But the BBC have been unearthing story after story of people with odd side effects from this drug. Lots of sort of compulsive, hedonistic behaviour. I'll read you a few summaries of people's experience. And most of these names are not their real names; have been changed by the BBC, but we'll go with them. So, for example, Claire says she began leaving her house in the early hours of the morning to cruise for sex. Wearing a see-through top and jacket, she would flash her chest at any man she could find. She did this regularly, she says, and in increasingly dangerous locations, despite having a partner. Sarah, not her real name, said, previously, I'd have had no interest if Brad Pitt walked in the room naked. But it turned me into this raging woman who kept taking sexual addiction further. Sarah began selling used underwear and videos of sex acts online and organising telephone sex with strangers. She also began shopping compulsively, ending up with £30,000 of debt. Compulsive shopping is a big one for these people. Also, a lot of compulsive gambling, compulsive smoking. In once I found a case study of a bloke who was 56 who suddenly started a 2-pack a day habit.
Nice.
Couldn't get him off it. Lots of shopping, lots of spending money on various things, and also a huge amount of sex addiction. So Michael, for example, whose name we've changed, I think I'm obsessed with sex, he says, adding that he's now slept with about 20 men and women despite being married. Previously, he'd never cheated on his wife or had any homosexual encounters, he says.
He says.
Likely story.
We only got his word for it, haven't we? Philip, over the 4 years that Philip took, I cannot say this bloody Ropinirole, he spent thousands of pounds on online gambling websites, standard. His gambling became compulsive and he was betting on anything he could and stopped caring about winning altogether. Philip also found himself shopping compulsively for clothes despite never previously having any interest in fashion. He often bought expensive clothes, shoes and accessories and hid them from his wife so that she could not see them. He did not think about whether he could afford them at the time and claims this shopping was not even enjoyable. Philip also felt compelled to go on 3-day-long fishing trips every single week. He became obsessed with purchasing excessive amounts of fishing equipment, much of which he never used and gave away for free. And finally, Sarah, she found that her dad was spying on her mum. This sounds more like psychosis, to be honest, but I'll read it anyway. You make your own mind up. During the pandemic, Sarah had grown increasingly alarmed about her father's secrecy and wanted to see what he'd been spending his time doing. In the loft, she discovered reams of handwritten notes and a dozen recording devices he had been using to bug his own home. In writing and on tape, he had documented innocent sounds his wife had made as she moved around the house and while she slept to try to prove she was having an affair. He had also catalogued details of numerous chat lines and porn websites he'd been obsessively using, so that's more standard Ropinirole behaviour. It was only when Sarah took him to see his specialist nurse 5 years ago that she learned the medication her father was on could have such extreme side effects. Oh, said the nurse, he's gone down the Randy route, has he? So this is clearly it is a well-recognised side effect. It does apparently say on the label, I think the phrase he uses, increases libido, which slightly downplays the extent to which it does. And you never know with these stories whether this is just people using Big Pharma as a scapegoat for their own poor behaviour. And some of the behaviour is very poor. And there are definitely legal companies involved, sort of where there's blame, there's a claim kind of basis. But my take on it is that although these people, some of them, maybe taken too much of the drug and have had excessive problems with it, something that gets people to liven up a bit, live in the moment, get out of their shell, is just what this country needs right now. Because we've got these GLP-1 drugs that basically do the opposite. They don't just stop you eating, they stop you eating by stopping you having any pleasure from food, don't they? I think the Ozempics and so on, but they also seem to stop people getting any pleasure out of drinking and quite possibly smoking.
Some people take it to cut down on drinking, don't they?
Right, but this thing, the restless leg drug, is kind of the opposite of it. So the
anti-Ozempic.
Yeah, exactly. It balances it. So clearly we need the GLP-1s for people who haven't got enough willpower, but we need the restless leg ones for people who actually need to live a little, liven up.
Isn't that the storyline of Brave New World, where they give everyone drugs to make them a bit happier?
They're all on the same drug,
a bit spikier.
They're all on Soma, aren't they? Which is sort of MDMA.
Yeah,
which I know has its place as well.
But the thing is, I was intrigued to read this story when Chris suggested it. I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about medicine, but I'm not convinced, I have to say. To me, it sounds like midlife crisis. A man in his 50s who suddenly starts taking up fishing or
compulsive
tries the opposite sex or whatever. Or, a woman in her 50s and 60s who starts flashing her breasts at people. It's not unheard of, is it? It is, there is a stage in life in which people think, what am I going to do now?
Take up fishing.
They do crazy things.
Explore my sexuality.
Yeah, my brother, out of the blue, took up fishing, and we were bamboozled. And he's not on this drug. He just suddenly started going fishing every weekend.
But presumably he wasn't flashing people.
He wasn't flashing people.
Yeah.
Andrew Adonis suddenly became gay in his late 50s.
Yeah, he did.
During Brexit.
Maybe he's on this drug. The thing I don't understand, I understand all drugs have side effects like nausea and even worse than that. But how could the side effect be not only that it would increase your libido or whatever else, but compel you to get out of your bed, get dressed, go to the ATM, take out £200, go to Paddy Power, put on a bet, watch the... How can a drug have that effect where at no stage of your behavior are you saying to yourself, I shouldn't do this? So unless this drug completely overrides your capacity to make a moral judgment, I'm not buying it. It does seem to me a bit like excuse making. And, even beyond this, I don't believe in the ideas like sex addiction or even gambling addiction. I know there can be gambling compulsion and it can be incredibly destructive. But I think even using the language addiction in relation to those things, which goes beyond this drug question, is a bit problematic because it kind of robs people of their capacity to say, I'm going to stop doing this. And it kind of actually brings them into a therapeutic framework, which can be really destructive. So instead of understanding their behavior as bad behavior, which at some level they are either choosing to do or feel compelled to do, it says to them, you can't help it. It's not your fault. Don't feel bad about it. You're just a sex addict. So that I find problematic. And there's a bit of a twist to that in relation to this story.
But if you, again, use the comparison with the GLP-1s, which essentially give you willpower, then it must logically make sense that there could be drugs that would do the opposite and remove willpower away from you. And all these people are doing things that are enjoyable, even fishing, arguably.
Yeah.
People find enjoyable. And they're not suddenly going, I've started washing the dishes all the time or something. They're gambling, they're having sex, they're drinking, they're
Buying
not
stuff.
drinking.
Are you going to try it?
Actually,
I think we should. That's
Take a
the only way we're going to
half
solve
a
this.
tab.
Try
I think
it
we should
live
all.
on the
What's the
pod.
drug called again?
Rapinarole.
We'll get some Rapinarole in. We'll give it a month,
episode,
and then we'll reconvene.
Tell your story.
See what happened.
Well, I mean, it's tempting though.
The thing is, what if you didn't get one of the fun ones though? Like rather than the compulsive shagging, you'd compulsively building model railways.
Yeah,
or
or
something.
putting
That would be
bugs around your house
be a
to
bit,
listen
be
to
a bit
yourself.
naff, wouldn't it?
But still be a good podcast.
That's true.
Still be a good
Comparing
story.
notes.
Somebody
we can compare notes and CCTV footage. It'd be
Someone
good.
on Twitter burst my bubble when I came up with this idea by saying that actually it's only a small minority of users of this drug who do have these side effects. Most people's side effects are just like nausea and throwing up.
Boring.
But there's also that causality issue. I don't even know if that's the right word, but sometimes things are seen as a consequence of a drug, but they're actually a consequence of something else. Like, do you remember Roaccutane, which is the drug people take for severe acne? People would often said that caused depression. But then later studies actually found out that actually what was making these kids depressed is that they were really fucking spotty.
Right.
And that's why they were depressed.
But
And,
wouldn't they cheer up when they had
well,
fewer
most
spots?
of them did cheer up because Roaccutane was incredibly
Rather
effective.
they blame it on the drug, though.
But some of them, because some of them didn't cheer up or had become so depressed as a consequence that they just couldn't get out of it. So it was then blamed on the drug. So I don't know. I just think it's a bit easy to rush to this kind of big pharma bashing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and
But I do
obviously
think-
I'm always going to stand with Big Pharma.
Yeah.
You should do a
Someone's
controlled.
got to. Yeah.
You should do a controlled experiment.
They have basically done well. Yeah, not okay on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have. There is a lot of science behind this. I wouldn't even mention this stuff if there's any chance of getting sued by GlaxoSmithKline. They've actually withdrawn the drug in America, and there is a lot of research involving lots of people where definitely there are impulse control disorders which are acknowledged by even the manufacturer. So I think the science has settled, Brendan. It's now time to use that science in the best possible way, which is to get everybody under 40 basically on these drugs and turn around the fortunes of Britain's pub trade and stop all these betting shops closing down.
All these Zoomers on their phones who aren't having sex.
Yeah,
Or buying
exactly.
anything.
That's
Well,
yeah.
Get them on the Rapinarole.
Exactly. Should we talk about Epstein? Couldn't think of a smart way to make that
He
transition.
may
but,
well
you know,
have been on Rapinarole.
He
I
could,
think
yeah,
about
but
it.
he was a very disinhibited man. As we
And
know.
all his friends.
We thought we'd talk about this because obviously the scandal continues to make a huge impact on British politics. We're talking the week that Peter Mandelson was arrested, just a week after we saw the arrest of Prince Andrew. And Brendan, you've been writing a lot about this particular issue and the extent to which it's sort of becoming somewhere between a feeding frenzy and a moral panic. Last time we had you on, I think we addressed this issue as well. So we thought we'd get you back
Yeah.
to take the temperature of where
See
the
if you
Epstein
changed your
scandal
mind.
is.
Yeah. I could be your Epstein correspondent.
Yeah.
Um,
It's an important part of a public health podcast,
Yeah,
I think. This
I
talk
think
about the
so.
Epstein scandal.
I agree. I feel like it's become one of those issues where it's impossible to have a reasoned discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we can, but in the world out there, it's virtually impossible. As you say, I've written a couple of pieces on this over the past couple of weeks. I've never been called a pedo so much in my life. I mean, it's every hour of every day. People have even found me on Instagram where, these are people who don't tend to use Instagram, but they've kind of come over just so they can call me a pedophile. I mean, it really is extraordinary. And people don't care a damn about defamation these days. Have you noticed this? People just issue libels morning, noon, and night. I tell you, the day I change my mind about the libel laws and decide they're actually a good thing, people are going to go broke. The amount of stuff that's been thrown at me is extraordinary. I just think
Doesn't it count as vulgar abuse if you get called a pedo?
Yeah,
Or are they
maybe.
going into detailed allegations?
There's
As
a
we learned
couple
from the
of
Joey Barton experience.
there's a couple of tweets that I
There's lines.
actually there was a couple of tweets that went viral that I actually thought were actionable. One said Brendan O'Neill is 100% a paedophile, and I thought, you know what, you fuckers are lucky that I'm not the kind of a litigious person, because
Could
it's
use
really
Elon Musk defense.
yeah.
Pedo guy is a common phrase
Yeah.
from where I'm from in South Africa.
But you know, it's relatively straightforward to brush it off, but it is indicative. It's interesting because if you say this has become hysterical or it's become a witch hunt, people will say, how dare you say that? If you say it again, we'll drag you into the public square and put you in the stocks. And you think, well, there you go, that's your proof. But what's happened with the Epstein scandal is that it has morphed into this all-purpose conspiracy theory about power in our world, about these venal elites, these pedophilic elites, these satanic elites who run the world from their yachts, from their islands, who eat children, who sacrifice children, who are satanic. I mean, that really is what we're talking about. There is so much of that on the internet. And the thing that pisses me off most about it, if you talk about it, people will say you're defending Jeffrey Epstein or you're defending Prince Andrew.
And you're a pedo.
And you're a pedo. But what I'm actually interested in is that it's actually conspiracy theories are the ruling class's best friend, because while everyone is on the internet in their millions chasing these completely unfounded stories about satanic networks who run the world, ordinary power is being exercised in plain sight. And the elites, the real elites, who we sometimes elect into power or sometimes they're unelected, they are still out there destroying the education system, destroying the economy, selling off our sovereignty for a pittance.
Making the frogs gay, everything.
Making the frogs gay, overlooking, the abuse of thousands of white working class girls. They're still doing all of that in plain sight. We can all see it. We can all name it. We could all talk about it. We could all hold them to account if we wanted to. But we've gone on this wild goose chase to try and find proof that Prince Andrew once whipped a girl with an electrical cord. I mean, that's one of the stories people have just completely fished out of nowhere. So the distractive nature of it, and actually the beneficial nature of the Epstein scandal to the people who really do run society, that's the thing that actually started to tick me off.
And it's been striking how those kind of claims about this being proof of this broader network of sex trafficking and abuse and so on, people act as if they've been vindicated by the Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson arrests, even though all of that relates purely to the question of misconduct in public office. And yet this conflation will still take place. And people will say, well, why haven't more people in America been arrested for this? It's because these are in reference to specific allegations about passing on information. It has nothing to do with the broader story. But in kind of classic conspiracy theory method, it just confirms the theory anyway, like even though it doesn't actually back it up. But what is the kind of, in terms of it becoming a runaway moral panic or what have you, where do you see that mainly? Is it the fact that just so many people are being dragged into it now as well? You saw that with Noam Chomsky. Anyone who seems to have ever fraternized with Epstein is just being presented as part of this network kind of reflexively. Is that what you're worried about? People, like innocent people, are getting dragged into this issue?
Very much so. I mean, it is really Salem-like, because what you're basically saying is you saw this person consorting with the devil. That's the level of accusation we're talking about. We saw Noam Chomsky consorting with the devil. What they're doing to Chomsky is just obscene. I mean, whatever one might think of Chomsky, I would agree with him on some issues and not on others. This is a man in his late 90s. He's had a stroke. He can't speak anymore. He apparently is aware of what's happening. But the left, like the little Stalinist arseholes that they are completely destroying him. They're completely airbrushing him out of their history. They're writing him off. They're deleting photographs that they once took with him. And they're trying to destroy his reputation. I mean, that is proof that this has become something quite irrational, because no one genuinely believes that Noam Chomsky was on an island taking part in satanic orgies. Like Stephen Hawking. People say Stephen Hawking was on this island. What was he up to? Not much, I would say.
Yeah.
He was probably giving his talks about science, because Epstein
Certain practical obstacles to him
There
getting
are practical
involved
obstacles.
in a lot of that.
There's that infamous tweet which said, quite rightly, that if you were sexually assaulted by Stephen Hawking, that's on you. because this is a guy who's not, you know, he was a brilliant, bright mind, but he was, as everyone knows, not particularly physically capable. So it's that guilt by association, but it even goes beyond that, because it's not only become a guilt by association, it's become this desire to find proof of the secret controllers of the world. And we see that all the time. That, you know, conspiracy theories as old as time. There's the 9/11 conspiracy theories, there's anti-Jewish ones. They've always existed. But these files, the release of these Epstein files, and I'm increasingly thinking it was a bad idea to release them, because it's driven the world completely insane. It's landed at exactly the right moment to create this insane storm of conspiracism. And I just find it incredibly unhealthy. People are going down rabbit holes. Even like friends of mine and colleagues of mine are saying the stupidest shit I've ever heard. And they're emailing
Do you want to name
me.
names?
I'm not gonna, no names. They're
Phrase
emailing
them out,
me
you know where you
saying,
are.
yeah, well, you know, why are you making apologies for pedo rings? So it's actually, I find it quite scary, if I'm being really honest. I think it's really irrational. And as I say, it's distracting from the hard task of calling out people whose names we know and whose jobs we know and who are doing a pretty good job of screwing up our country. And that's, I think, what we should be focused on.
And it still stands to this day. The only two people who've ever been arrested, let alone prosecuted for anything around sex trafficking or sexual abuse in relation to Epstein, is Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell. And yet this kind of cloud of suspicion seems to be cast over everyone. Chris, you got anything on Epstein?
I don't care about this story. So I can't believe the media's been going on about it for so long. I didn't know Epstein was until he died. And I only knew about him dying because people said he'd been murdered. I've never cared about the royal family at all at any point, even when Diana died, and you know. And I certainly don't care about people like Prince Andrew or the other one, Edward or whatever, Anne people. Don't understand why anyone does. But when he got arrested, the BBC banner, I think, was even bigger than when the Queen actually died. And you know, I don't care about these people, but I kind of lean towards not liking them. I don't particularly like Mandelson, don't particularly hate him, but don't particularly like him, don't particularly like Prince Andrew, but don't really care. I have no feelings about Epstein. I never really read up on what he's been up to, but it sounds like a bad egg. But the little reading I did into saying, well, what has Peter Mandelson done wrong now? What is his misconduct in a public office? It was like he was emailing Epstein when Gordon Brown told him that the EU was going to bail out the euro or whatever, something like that, right? Well, I bet he's probably out of order, and you know, I hope he gets fined or whatever. But who cares? What effect did that have on me or the country or anyone? So Epstein was making a little bit of money, a little bit of arbitrage from insider trading. Yeah, bad form. Obviously, we shouldn't have been facilitating it. But it doesn't matter.
And it being some kind of offence seems to make sense. You want to have a disincentive against people in public life from
but
just
it was
passing on
15 years ago, and
information.
it had no effect on our country. It's not like the bloody Cambridge spy ring or something like that. You know what I mean? We're not talking about communist spies trying to undermine the country. What amazes me about Epstein, this guy who had so much money, is he spent an inordinate time hanging around with boring twats like Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson.
The question you have to ask yourself is why?
Yeah,
because he wanted to get a bit of information, presumably, so he could play the markets.
Or
didn't he have a better? Didn't he? Well, yeah, it does make the conspiracy make more sense, because, like, surely he's got a better ways to make a bit more money, or even stop making more money, just enjoy the money you've got, than having to put it with Peter Mandelson on your yacht for weeks
in his
constantly,
underpants.
constantly emailing back and forth. There's not even like glamorous people.
But I read about some of his parties, not the rumored sex parties, but some of his parties, and you think, actually, Woody Allen, Noam Chomsky.
It's all coming out now.
I'd have gone. I would have hung out.
This is not going to help you. With
I
your
would have
critics.
hung out with some of those people. Stephen Hawking. I mean, they would have been some great conversations. But the thing is,
yeah, but not Mandelson and Prince Andrew.
Not Mandelson and Prince Andrew. I
Who
agree
seem
with
to
that.
be his
But I
best
think
buddies.
the issue with someone like Mandelson. I mean, I actually think there are questions for Mandelson to answer.
Oh yeah.
Because I do think it's dodgy to forward documents to someone, and if you have that position of responsibility and you're forwarding on sensitive documents, you have questions to answer. The issue. So that's a discrete problem, and he should answer for them. I actually agree with you that I don't think it's a big deal, and it was a long time ago, and I think it will be very hard to find proof that even if he did this, because it's all allegations, that it had a destructive impact on the nation. So we'll see how that plays out. But it's the tangling together of that discrete problem, alleged misconduct, with this idea of a vast network. And I'm now of the opinion that it is impossible for Mandelson or Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as we must now call him, I think it's impossible for them to have a fair trial, because what is happening on the internet and the way in which they're seen as being, suspicious, the suspicion of satanic links, it's just going to be very difficult. But the line for me, people are now dragging in the Queen. And that,
Not
for
having
me,
that, yeah.
I'm
the current Queen or the
no, the
previous
late
Queen?
Queen.
The late Queen.
I've always called myself an Elizabethan Republican, in the sense that I'm a Republican. I don't want a monarchy, but I was a great admirer of Elizabeth II. They're now saying she bailed out the pedos.
Yeah.
She gave money to Andrew. She covered up for what he did, what he is said to have done. I mean, if that happens, if even the late Queen gets dragged down by this, then that will be hard proof that this scandal has spun really out of control.
And you can see it spinning out of control with the way the police are reacting. Because again, it's like, clearly misconduct in public office should be investigated, of course. And it is a genuine scandal, and it's been delightfully embarrassing for Keir Starmer. But there is the overreaction from every 8 or 9 police forces are now investigating whether or not various airports were used for sex trafficking. The fact that they arrest Mandelson because they think he's going to be a flight risk, because there was a rumor that he might go to the British Virgin Islands, which are British territory anyway, so they can retrieve him very easily. There's an overreaction and overcorrection, which does bring to mind U-Tree and all the rest of it, even though it's on a different scale of offences. But we should park Epstein. We'll have to bring you back once we're all.
I'll come back.
You come back to talk about Epstein.
You can come back
to talk
when
about...
there's definite proof of mass abuse.
Exactly. You can answer your questions.
Young women by this. What is very obviously, whether it's a paedophile ring or not, I don't know, but it's very clearly an elite ring. It's almost, almost beyond the dreams of conspiracy theorists. The fact that so many people were colluding with this very rich guy on an island and a yacht. I think I said this last time.
I mean,
you
it's
can't
the
deny that
perfect.
it is a huge network of very influential rich
Yeah,
people.
it's
right?
the perfect. The conspiracy theorists is like Christmas has come at once for them, because it is perfect for them. Because these are influential, powerful people. Also, there are Jewish people involved, and a lot of conspiracy theorists are anti-Semitic, and you can see that on the internet every day of the week at the moment. And it's got princes and rich people and billionaires, and there definitely were sex parties, and there definitely were prostitutes. So it's perfect for those people. But what they've done with it, if they've transformed an elite network into something even more debauched than that, even worse than that, and something which had this kind of masterful control over all our lives. It's such a debilitating theory, and actually eats away at democracy, because we all have it within ourselves to call into question politics, and this reduces us to these wide-eyed spectators of debauchery, which I don't think is a good position to be in. Unless you like that kind of thing.
I don't know. I've been a wide-eyed spectator of debauchery.
Yeah.
And it's probably why Noam Chomsky was there.
And if we get on these
And Steve Moore.
And if we get on these restless leg drugs, we could be a wild-eyed, participant in the
We could indeed. We could and we will.
Let's go.
At some point. Should we go to our final section? The 2 questions that we ask all of our guests. Should we start off with your theory, Brendan? Have you developed a new
Any new theories recently, Brendan?
I really struggle with theories, but I do have one, which is that we need to bring back kink shaming. And now some people might not know what kink shaming is, but it is a big thing. And the opposition to kink shaming is a huge thing, where the left, the woke left, the kind of all those people will say don't kink shame. This came to my mind when I was watching Wuthering Heights, the new Emerald Fennell film, which I quite enjoyed. It's getting a lot of flack, but I thought it was good fun.
Including on Spiked, I should say.
It was a great review on Spy by Ella, which was a good read, but I disagree with it. It's a fun film, but it's got this BDSM storyline, which I'm pretty sure is not in Emily Bronte's novel.
There's no ball gag.
No. So I don't know where that comes from. But I was watching it and I was thinking, watching these BDSM scenes where Heathcliff literally treats his wife as a sub. Like he forces her to do sub-style BDSM things. It's really weird. It's definitely not in the novel. But you can tell it's in the film to try and feel transgressive, but it feels so untransgressive.
Yeah.
It feels so lame, and it has no shock factor whatsoever, because of course all of those sexual subcultures have been completely mainstreamed over the past few years. I'll always remember the time when the BBC News website did some coverage of a Pride march about 5 or 6 years ago, and a photo essay about pride in London, and they included in it these 3 fat blokes in their 50s who were wearing nappies.
Yeah.
They included this photo as pride. And I remember looking at that thinking, okay, those 3 men in nappies deserve to be kink shamed, because if your kink is going out in public,
They should have no pride.
wearing a you should
If
have no
anything,
pride.
Shame.
Shame rather than pride. You should be kink shamed. So you
Start
often
a shame march.
yeah.
Just point of it,
Force them to go on it.
London shame.
Yeah.
Shame month.
So this idea that you yeah,
We got the progress shame flag. We can have.
we'd all take part in that. That would be good crack. But this idea that you shouldn't kink shame people is bollocks, isn't it? Because it's leading people to do stupid, sad, ridiculous things and to make a fool of themselves and to engage in perversions that they shouldn't be engaging in.
Yeah.
So my theory is that
That's more of a ban than a theory.
well, my theory is that the removal of kink shaming has allowed people to behave in profoundly antisocial ways, and we should kink shame them and make them do that stupid stuff in private.
Well, the removal of shame in general.
Yeah.
This goes back to your point about people being annoying on tubes and vaping too much and all the rest of it. It's a very Peter Hitchens point.
It is,
He's
but
very keen on bringing back shame.
in a good way. There are things that we agree with Peter Hitchens on. Have you got a band, Brendan?
You are a dictator.
Oh, I've got a controversial band.
Good.
It's not a fun one.
Okay, no,
All right,
that's
go
all-
on,
that's
let's
all
hear
good.
it.
I've been thinking about this so much over the past few months. I think, and I agree with Reform UK on this, I think we need to ban face coverings in public.
All face coverings or
yeah.
just burqa?
All face
Face
coverings.
masks? COVID staff?
I mean, the burqa in particular, and I've written about this so much over the years, and I've tussled with it because it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it does mean that some of those women just won't go out in public, and that's tragic, because it's their belief that they shouldn't, or they won't be allowed, or their husbands won't let them. That's a problem. I'm not demeaning that problem, but I just think the crisis of integration at the moment is so profound. And the fact that people are living parallel lives in just entirely different cultural universes, where you can walk down a street in London and you encounter people who just who don't speak your language, don't wear your clothes, don't subscribe to any of your values. It feels increasingly jarring. So it just makes me think that probably a few drastic measures are needed. And one of them might be that in Britain, you have to show your face when you're in the public realm. Now, it's not an easy one, and it's definitely not a fun one, but I think probably that's a step we should take.
Yeah.
See how it goes.
I'd back that as well to get on top of obviously the integration issue. Also the balaclava issue, the mainstreaming of that in London is
Actual
That's bad.
Actual balaclavas.
IRA style.
Young lads in particular wearing sort of black balaclavas, just wandering around trying to be menacing.
I don't like
That's
the
also
people
good.
who have things up around their face when they're on bikes.
No, exactly. It makes it really quite.
Do you call that a balaclava?
It was
It's a
close,
scarf kind of thing, isn't it? I
sort
don't know
of
why
close
they
to
do
it.
that, but I don't like it.
And also
I
there's-
dislike that more than I dislike the burqa.
And also, we're very libertarian on this podcast. But there's all sorts of things you can't walk. You can't walk around the state undressed in public. So
Yeah.
maybe covering your face isn't necessarily as big of
Yeah.
a jump either.
Show your face.
But,
we deserve to see.
I think you've already undermined it actually with your original point about what's actually going to happen to these women. They are just going to have to be kept indoors.
we
which is
can
pretty bad.
we can deal with that later.
How
I
are
just
we gonna
think
deal with that?
at the moment the public realm is in such a frayed state. We've got to do something about it. And you should be able to, in a free society, you should be able to see other people's faces.
They banned it in France, didn't
They did,
Yeah.
they? How did that go?
I think it went all
I
right.
mean, let's learn from another country. Evidence-based policy. Then we can do an impact assessment.
We'll look it up.
And we'll just go through the proper procedure, see if it's evidence-based, and if it is, then fine, I'll go along with it. But until then, we'll stick to my libertarian principles.
Cool. We'll bring back kink shaming, take that burqa off, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Orders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another spiked video. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, make sure you subscribe there and give us a glowing 5-star review. And if you'd like to get in touch with your questions or band suggestions, email us at lastorders@spiked-online.com.